Hello, I believe we are finally live. Thank goodness. I had to reload the page and everything. Sorry, folks. I also had some nice chill background music on, but I think it was using too much of the internet, so I've just had to switch it off. But hello, friends. Um, so I'm going to start by answering a few questions. Maria had a few that she left on the lesson for this week. But if anyone else has questions, please stick them in the chat now, because I would like to talk about those first, and then I want to hear how the assignment went for you guys. Oh, I have a big echo. Let me know if anyone else is hearing that as well. I don't think there should be, there's no sign of that on my end, unfortunately. So yeah, let me know, did anyone get stuck anywhere with the assignment or have any questions about it or about the lesson? Just stick those in the chat. But in the meantime, I will get started on Maria's questions. So let me just get them up here. Sorry, Christy, I think it might be just on your side of things. Okay, so Maria asked, when you do mind mapping, do you make yourself stop at 20 minutes if you're still writing? No, if you're still literally writing, one answer or something, then absolutely finish that before you stop. It depends. If I am, so the 20-minute kind of timer is to give you a finite period in which to mind map, if that makes sense. But as I said in the lesson, you can do that, or you can also, do it until you fill the whole page, or until you don't feel like you've got anything left in your head, although that can often take a lot longer. And I wanted to keep it quite short and manageable for you guys, at least for lesson one. So that's why I set the 20-minute limit. But if you are happy to continue brainstorming and you feel like you've still got a lot more in you and you're not particularly tired, then absolutely feel free to brainstorm for longer than that. Oh no, okay, well, I'm glad you got it sorted, Christy. That's funny. So yeah, let me know if that answers your question. I think it does. So that's the first one. The second question is, how do you decide the level of detail you go into? My instinct sometimes made me ask myself, why did I write this idea? But I was wondering if I was investigating too early. I think I filled my page quickly because I put too much details. There's not really a hard and fast rule for how detailed you need to be. I think your brain kind of takes you along a particular path, and you kind of, brainstorming a lot of the time is just following that, like following the train of thought, and like whatever comes up, just writing it down. And so you might find that, one particular idea, you get lots of details about that, and you end up, filling like maybe a third of the page with that. And then you'll have other ideas, which is just one word, and that's totally fine. So I wouldn't stress too much about worrying if you're going into too much detail or not enough. As long as you're kind of following the ideas that come up, I think you should be fine. And I don't think you can fill your page too quickly, unless, well, no, I don't think you can. I think you're fine. So let me just check if we've got any questions here. Cool. Okay. Good. I will answer. Actually, I think yes. Okay, I'm going to answer Elizabeth's question and then jump back to one of Maria's. So Elizabeth is asking, should we do the other questions that we didn't mind map? I.e., if we did the angry question, do you also map out the fear question? This is really up to you. I set one of each, like one question from each group, the kind of positive and negative ones, as a kind of starting point. It's up to you. If you can absolutely do the other questions, if you are driven to, if you feel interested in doing that, if you think you would get things out of it. But it's not necessary, I think. So I actually thought that this question might come up based on some things that people were saying in the Discord about not knowing if you were coming up with the right sort of things. So I can't remember who it was, I'm afraid. But someone was saying that in what am I obsessed with right now, they were coming up with a lot of things around jealousy and things, and that maybe kind of took the whole kind of brainstorm off in one particular direction, which didn't maybe feel as much like it was about my shit TM as it could have been. And so I think if you have a situation like that where you got really interesting things from the mind map from that particular question, but you don't feel like you actually really got deep into your shit TM, then absolutely do another of the questions to see what comes out differently. I think actually there's lots of different questions you can use to explore your shit TM, and so I tried to pick kind of the big ones, the most effective ones, and give you a choice of that. But obviously, depending on which question you ask, you're going to get lots of different answers, and that's going to be specific to each person as well. You know, particular questions are going to be particularly good for you in terms of really exploring your shit TM. Let me know if that answers your question, Elizabeth. So I guess to sum up, it's optional. If you think you would get a lot of interesting things out of it and you're motivated to do it, absolutely have at it. I am never going to tell you that you're doing too much brainstorming. I can tell you that now. Throughout the academy, I don't think there is such a thing as too much brainstorming, unless you have decision paralysis and you're procrastinating making a choice about something. But I think with a kind of explorative task or assignment like this, you can go as deep as you like. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to one of Maria's questions again. She had, if several ideas look vaguely similar, do you still write them all down, or do you filter to only write one of them? I think it's more important to not filter yourself. And so if you are coming up with lots of things that are similar, write them all down just to get them out in the spirit of not censoring yourself. I think if you worry, I think actually when you get things, so your brain does this kind of, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the term monkey brain, but it's that idea of one thought leads you to another, and you're kind of swinging from one thing to the other. And I guess it's like the idea of train of thought, thinking about one thing, you have a connection with something else, and that takes you kind of onwards. That is really the core of mind mapping. And when you write down one thought or one idea, it's often going to branch off a lot of other ones that are similar or related, and it's totally fine to write all of those down. You don't want to be rewriting the same thing, but if it's similar or just related, but quite similar, that's totally fine. Okay. So Russell asks, what led you to create the magic question? I'm curious the evolution in your work to get to that point. That's a very interesting question, and I don't know if I've ever actually thought about the process of finding my process, I suppose. I initially started brainstorming properly in a kind of focused way when I was trying to get my plot for North of the End together. And that was back when, so some of you might have seen my really old video series on writing called How to Build a Story, which was, I think it was a five-part series, and it dealt with brainstorming, motive, conflict, effect, and outlining. And it was I really made those videos because I'd had a breakthrough of my own. I'd kind of taken some concepts from a writing course that I'd done and made them work for me and translated them into a format that I could actually work with. And it was through trying to apply that paradigm, I suppose, of motive, conflict, effect, or resolution to my work that I figured out how to use magic questions and how to use them to focus brainstorming, and realizing that, I would get these definitions of what motive was or what conflict was from, writing advice, and my ability to turn that into a question, which I could then use to generate ideas, was a real huge turning point for me. And obviously I've kind of been working with it in different guises ever since. I hope that answers your question. But I can't really think of anything more specific than that in terms of like what actually led me to that technique and to the concept of magic questions. It's really just that I realized that I needed to generate ideas and I didn't know how to do that. And so I started using questions, and that was years ago now. And I still just am constantly surprised by the power of questions when you know how to brainstorm. So I'm going to jump back to Maria's last question and then jump back to the chat, which there is another question in, I think. So Maria asks, would you have any particular tips on what kind of connections to identify once you're done? 90% of my ideas are linked to an arrow that comes straight from the question, few from an idea subheading. That's totally fine. Don't worry about there's not any kind of set number of like subheadings or anything you need to have. It's just, that's like another tool that you can use. But if every single thing on your mind map just comes out from the middle, that's totally fine as well. The connections, I guess, that I'm talking about are things that you maybe notice once you've finished. So if you guys remember in the lesson when I did the example of a mind map brainstorm and I was brainstorming, what plant could this character use in her spell? It was only when I started to step back after I'd kind of mostly finished the mind map that I started to see the connections between, medicinal plants and then plants that can hurt you or that are poisonous or spiky or stinging. And that kind of connection was kind of interesting to me. I can't remember if I actually drew any arrows. I don't think I did. I don't think I had enough space, but just noticing that is useful. So that's really the kind of thing I mean, is just, having a look and seeing if there are any, so mind mapping as you go through it, you are making connections and stuff, but often when you're on kind of one train of thought, you kind of forget what you've just done. And so the point of that really is just once you've finished to stop and see, like, are there any connections between things? Is there a similar theme occurring here? Are there, like, have I solved a problem here, which I spoke about there? It's just in case there are any extra connections that you can glean from it. But if there aren't, like, it doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It just, like, mind maps end up totally different and totally unique every single time. They're kind of like snowflakes. It's just an extra tool to get extra insight from the mind map, if there is any to be gleaned from it. But if you don't get anything, in terms of like further connections after you're finished, then that's totally fine. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Okay, so Stephen, thank you for putting your name in the chat there as well, asks, now that we have these mind maps, is the idea to pick them apart and select elements that can be useful to our stories? Yes, kind of. You will see in lesson 2, which I'm working on. I was working on some of it today. I've forgotten about my tea. So they're kind of twofold, I suppose, in purpose. One is obviously just for you to see, what do I care about? What is important to me? Kind of like unearthing your shit TM, just so that you know what it is. And then we can start to think about, okay, well, how can I bring that into my writing? Different, and this is another area where the different kind of magic questions for doing a My Shit TM snapshot come in useful. So the what makes me angry and what do I fear questions, they tend to be really good for mining for things to contribute to conflicts for your story, for villains and antagonists, because the things that make you angry make really good antagonists for your stories. I suppose the positive ones are a bit more varied. So, what fascinates me right now can be it can help you think about genre. It can help you think about setting. It can help you think about what kind of story. It's really obviously multifaceted in terms of what it can contribute to in terms of elements to your story. What are the other questions again? What fascinates me? What am I obsessed with right now? That's another one. I think actually, I don't know if you guys know Scarlett Thomas, but she uses that question to generate what she calls a novel matrix. And she basically just makes a big list of all the things that she's really interested in, what she's obsessed with at the moment, and tries to find different ways to link them up to make a story. So for her book Popco, for instance, I think she had things like code breaking, like animal welfare, big like toy corporations and stuff, and stuff, a lot of stuff that seemed totally unrelated. And when you read Popco, you're like, oh my God, all of those things are in there, and it is a strange kind of winding amalgamation of all those things. So, and the final question, what was it again? So what fascinates me right now? What am I obsessed with, and what lights me up? And again, what lights me up is going to be a really great fodder for all sorts of different elements of your story. It could be, hobbies or topics or subject matter or settings or characters or anything like that. But yes, essentially the idea is that we want to start to translate some of that into what our stories will be. But we have other ways of generating more material for that as well, which you will see in lesson 2. I keep forgetting to drink my tea. Lou here, when pensieving, do you just write down any stray thoughts that aren't useful at the time but might be important at another time, and then attempt to forget about them? Okay, pensieving. Okay, this isn't super on topic because I don't actually teach pensieving. It's just kind of like another thing. But you guys know that I talk about it a lot in terms of like my bullet journal and stuff. So to me, it depends. Yeah, I guess there's different forms of pensieving. You can do it in different ways. So there's like a pensieve kind of task built into the original bullet journal system, and that is what Rachael calls the mental inventory. And so he has you divide a page of paper into 3, and you have what I am working on, what I should be working on, and what I want to be working on. And he has you basically download everything, kind of pensieve everything which could fit into any of those categories. And then in the bullet journal method, he's like, get it all out of your brain first, and then we want to evaluate, okay, is this something I actually need to do? Does it matter? Is it vital? Is this actually going to impact my life if I do it? And he has you either transfer those things into your task list for the month, or score them out and try and, he's like, that's a distraction, or that's something that is in your brain but that you don't actually need to do, so just score it out, and then you've kind of purged it in a way. So that's kind of one form of the pensieve. The other form is what I've talked about as the kind of like continual pensieving action that I use in my daily logs of my bullet journal. So every day I have, a page where I can write tasks, and then notes and things, which are that kind of pensieve action. And to me, so I think Rachael actually suggests that you look at your day's log, so your tasks and notes and stuff, like every evening, and then start the next day like every morning, and kind of go through and evaluate it then, like, is this something that I need to action? Is it just a thought that I had? Do I want to transfer this into another place where it might be more useful? I tend to forgo that, to be honest. I don't tend to actually do that every night, but I do look through my entire month at the end of the month when I'm setting up my new month, and I go through every single note and I decide, okay, is it fine that it's just there? Or, is that a novel note that needs to then go, wherever my novel stuff is? Or do I want to put that on my groceries list? Or does that go on another list? Like, can I put it somewhere else where I can put it into action? And I do that, I guess, on a kind of monthly basis. So it depends what kind of pensieve, I suppose, you're doing. You can just download everything for the sake of it. But I think most people, when they talk about brain dumping or idea dumping or pensiving, they do have it in mind that you're going to do something with that stuff, or at least kind of go through and cull out what's important and then kind of get rid of the rest of it. That's a very long answer to something that's not super relevant, but I hope that answers your question and that it's maybe interesting as well. So next question. Elizabeth asks, do you want us to refrain from doing any writing activities? I keep getting ideas and I want to explore them, but I don't want to mess up the process of the academy. This is an interesting question, and I'm not actually sure. So when people were asking me questions about the academy before we started, they were asking, if I'm in the middle of a project, should I stop what I'm doing and suspend it and kind of put it on the back burner while I do the academy and then go back to it? And to that I said, it's really up to you. If you feel like you have time to both do the academy and work on another project, then do them simultaneously, as long as you're actually doing the assignments from the academy. Then obviously the rest of your time is your time to do what you will with. But yeah, I can see how, if you are thinking of maybe story ideas or starting something new or having things going on in the background, especially if that is like story creation stuff, that might start to, if not conflict, then maybe just make things a little bit confusing with the academy. I mean, ultimately, it's always your choice at the end of the day. But I guess I want to know what you mean by, I keep getting ideas and I want to explore them. What do you mean by explore them? Like, is that to do some more kind of story creation stuff, or to do some brainstorming, or are you like, I want to start writing the draft of this now? I think maybe a kind of workaround, if you would really like to still be actually generating words or drafting things while going through the academy, you might think about maybe just doing some like writing prompts or exercises or vignettes and that kind of thing in your spare time, instead of maybe tackling like a really big project like a novel or a screenplay. Yeah, but I'm interested actually if anyone else has any thoughts or opinions on this, because I don't feel like I can give you like a clear cut, you should or you shouldn't. It's kind of going to be different for everyone. I'm sorry, I know that's a bit of a cop out. Yes, okay, cool. Amity means, I know you've already told me who you are, but I've forgotten, I'm sorry. But yes, Our Tragic Universe is brilliant, even though it made me very angry, because structure and things. But it's one of those books that I put it down like, oh, how dare you? But it stuck with me my whole life, and I still think it's very interesting, and I've taken a lot away from it. So it's one of those books that's like important but kind of frustrating for me. Okay, so Erin asks, do you brainstorm during each of your writing sessions when you're working on a draft, or do you tend to separate brainstorming and drafting sessions? Well, it depends what I'm doing. So this is kind of getting a little bit way ahead of where we are in the academy, because in our final lesson, I do talk about how I draft, in terms of like how I like how much outlining or prep I do in advance, and then how I organize brainstorming that I have to do kind of throughout the drafting process and stuff. I do talk about that in a fair amount of detail in lesson 10. So I won't go into in a ton of it here. But it depends what stage you're at and what you need, really. I think you kind of, well, I guess, okay, so here's one answer to this question. I try to stick to one task per writing session, whatever that means. If I'm sitting down to do one thing, if I'm drafting and I let myself like get distracted and start brainstorming something, that is almost two different writing sessions for me. And I try not to do that unless it's absolutely necessary, because I think it's depending on if you struggle more with brainstorming or drafting. If you are switching between them kind of willy-nilly, it's quite easy to use the one that you like better as a way to procrastinate on the one that you don't like as much. So I think you can be flexible with it, but it's just about keeping an eye on, like, are you actually progressing things forward, or are you kind of treading water just because you can, or because you're maybe afraid to move things forward? Like, there are some points where you're like, I literally can't write the next part without figuring out this particular question. And so then I would stop to brainstorm. But as soon as I get the answer to that question, it has to be back to drafting. Otherwise, again, you're just kind of procrastinating. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant by that question, but I hope that that answers it somewhat. Yeah, Stephen saying maybe list the ideas, very bare bones to come back to later. I think in response to Elizabeth talking about, yeah, kind of other ideas and stuff. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I should have said this as well. Definitely, if you're having ideas, by all means, write them down. But I suppose the Academy is really about learning how to focus on one idea and pursue it without getting totally distracted by other things which come up, I suppose, if that makes sense. I guess what some people would call shiny idea syndrome, where as soon as you're working on one thing and you've made a commitment to it, like lots of other things end up coming up and it all seems very exciting, and you immediately just want to drop what you're doing and then go on to that. I think it's good form to write those down, but kind of put them aside. But one other thing that you can do, which I believe I spoke about it in one of my Patreon live streams, where I was talking about Maggie Stiefvater seminar that I went to. She talks about the idea of kind of purging those shiny ideas through writing short stories with them, even if it is a story that she can see becoming a book one day. It's kind of helpful to write it in this really condensed form, to kind of exorcise that idea, to stop it kind of haunting you and bugging you while you're trying to work on something else. So that's not something I've tried myself, but it's something that I have been thinking of trying in future for sure. Elizabeth saying, I guess what I mean is, should I start brainstorming different ideas that I get, or just note them somewhere until later? Okay, this is really clear, and I can give you a very clear answer. Just note them, don't brainstorm them yet, because I'm going to show you how to brainstorm things in a particular order, and how to do it in the way that I personally think makes the most sense and is the most effective and stuff. So I would hang fire on brainstorming any of them until we get to that stage in the Academy. Probably you will end up using some of them and generating some of them in next week's lesson as well. So hopefully this shouldn't be something that's kind of hanging over you for a long time. Exercise. Yeah, I was just trying to be clear that I wasn't, talking about exercise. You know what I mean. You guys know what I mean. Okay, any more questions about the assignment or about the lesson for this week? Okay, if anything comes up, I can answer it as well. But yes, now I want to, sorry, I'm referring to my notes here because obviously I've made notes. I want you to tell me how you got on, like with the assignment. How did it go? How did you find it? Was there anything that was particularly difficult? Did you enjoy it? Did anything surprise you? I would really like to hear how it went for you guys. So please do stick that in the chat. Yeah, because I think, I mean, so obviously don't feel that you have to share if anything is particularly personal, because I know that obviously this assignment is very personal. But yes, please let me know, how did it go? Actually, I suppose some of you might not have finished um, as well, which is fine. Cool. Brittany says, I found a lot of connections between the different mind maps, interesting threads that are more related than I thought. Yes, that's very interesting. That's also something that Stephen Ryder, who did the Academy 1.0, also said, that he found that his positive and negative mind maps were kind of like two sides of the same coin, which is a phrase that I use very, very often, I know. But like he found that, like, you know, the things he was afraid of, it was like the opposite of the things that he was excited by and stuff like that. So that's something that can definitely come through. And I think really when you see kind of mirror images like that, it really shows that that is something that is deeply your shit, TM. So that's cool. Chrissy says, I chose the question, what makes me angry right now? And I felt like nothing came up that surprised me. So I'm kind of concerned that maybe I didn't go deep enough. Okay, well, I mean, it doesn't have to surprise you to be an effective assignment. I think how this goes for different people is going to be hugely different, because I'm kind of asking you to get in touch with yourself. And some people are already really in touch with themselves and how they feel and what they care about, and some people aren't as much. So if you're one of those people that actually pays quite a lot of attention to how you feel about things, and you know yourself quite well, then it might be that you already kind of know this stuff and nothing does come up that surprises you. Whereas if you are someone that is maybe not so good at or doesn't pay attention as often to, you know, kind of what's going on internally, then you might be like, oh my God, there's a whole bunch of stuff here that I'd never really let myself think about. But also, if you are worried about that, you can continue to brainstorm that question a little bit longer. So, you know, go beyond the 20 minutes, or, you know, start a new page or something like that. Or maybe try doing the other question as well. But this is something that I answered with Tatiana for, again, the 1.0 version of the Academy. She was like, I feel like I was getting quite surface level things. And like, is that okay? Do I need to go deeper? And yeah, sometimes that is what happens. Like sometimes this process and mind mapping and brainstorming and stuff in general is really about practicing, kind of exercising the muscle. That's a different kind of exercising the muscle of delving into your own mind and kind of going deeper. But it can be hit and miss, like, especially depending on the question. Like I think for this exercise, one time I brainstormed the question, what do I need? And you find that you're coming up with things that are really surface level and quite boring. Water, shelter, food and stuff. And that's okay. Sometimes it's just that all of the surface level stuff comes out first, because it's like you almost have to like spoon out all the surface level stuff so that you can start to get to the layers underneath. But sometimes it also means that you just maybe need to change the question, or maybe go for a bit longer and things like that too. Oh, Tatiana's here as well. Hello. So Lou said, I enjoyed the assignment. I used to mime up a lot in the past, but nothing recently. A lot of what came up for me were things I'm dealing with now for both questions. That's good, because yeah, like I said, like what comes up in these kind of things is going to change drastically depending on where you are with yourself in your life. So it's good to focus on, yeah, what does this mean to me right now? Christy says, okay, that makes sense. I'm definitely very aware of my feelings. Yeah, it might just be that you know yourself really well. That's totally fine. Russell says, I did part A and it was late night for me. I'll probably do it again to see if a different time makes me focus on a completely different mindset of magics. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Yeah, feel free to do a different question and stuff as well. Oh, quite scratchy actually. Since speaking. Interesting. Thank you guys for consistently telling me your names. It's very helpful. Maria says, I enjoyed the exercise, but I retrospectively wonder if for my answers, I focus too much on my feelings and how I project myself in life instead of thinking about more adventurous or material stuff. I think if that's what came up for you, that's totally fine. But if you would like to do a kind of like, okay, ask myself this question, but what about material things, kind of version of the mind map, you totally can. And that often tends to be really helpful for generating story material. So you can say, what do I love? What material things do I love? Or yeah, kind of like modify the question in that way. If you struggle to come up with things in that vein, like give yourself a specific question and maybe go, you don't have to do another 20 minutes, but maybe do 10 minutes or something like that. Because I do find the kind of concrete material stuff is helpful as well, for sure. Okay, great. So I think, I want to ask you guys as well, how did you find mind mapping specifically? Obviously, there's kind of different parts to the assignment. There's the actual exploration, and then there's the mind mapping kind of format. I'm sure some of you, and as people have already said, some of you have done it before. For some of you, this might be your first ever time mind mapping. So let me know, how did you find that? Did you... Yeah, I suppose actually I'm interested as well in how you guys found it to work analog, and in terms of if anyone used like the kind of how to draw things out tips and stuff. How did you guys get on with that? Stephen says, it may be because I did the second mind map right after the first, but I found that what do I love right now was counteracting a lot of what makes me angry right now. Yes, I think, and we have 3 Stephens. I don't know how, 3 Stephens and a Rachael Stephen, but Stephen Ryder said a similar thing, that like there did seem to be really strong connections between the positive and negative things that came up. Russell said, I love the drawing techniques. Well, I'm glad, because obviously these things aren't quite as important, but I do find them handy as well. Brittany says, I haven't ever tried mind mapping, but using colour and doodles helped me see the utility of it. The mind patterns were definitely different from a list style. Yeah, it really is crazy. I mean, I've been doing this for years, obviously, but even, doing it for the lesson video, I was kind of surprised by what came out differently when I did it mind map versus list method. Cool. Chrissy says, I felt like it was hard to know where to put my arrows afterwards because I didn't feel like a lot of things were specifically relating to each other, but I love the analog part of it. That's totally fine. I mean, like, where your arrows go is really just for you. Like, no one's going to come up and be like, I don't think those things are really connected. Or I can't believe your arrows are in the wrong place. You just kind of feel it out. Often, like, I find that I connect things just because it's on kind of one train of thought, even though the ideas themselves aren't particularly connected. It's just, I sometimes just also feel like I'm connecting things quite randomly, but yeah, whatever. Lou said, I like the drawing, although I'm not the best doodler. That's totally fine. Yes, I enjoyed the analog method. I focus better when I take notes versus when I'm only reading. I find that too, for sure. Like, I actually used to, well, this is something that I hadn't even thought about as well. So something I think that I mentioned in my original brainstorming video just on YouTube is that a lot of the formats of brainstorming, you can use them for note-taking as well, where you're not actually generating anything new, you're just transcribing things. And I actually used to take my lecture notes for university in the form of mind maps, or at least I figured that out during university, maybe in my last few years or something. And it's a really great method for note taking. I find that it does kind of burn things into my brain a little bit more than kind of linear note taking. Stephen says, I've mind mapped before, but not for creating stories. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I think mind maps are incredibly versatile, obviously. And brainstorming, obviously, isn't something that's just limited to writing, although I think it's incredibly, it works incredibly well for writing, and that's what we're using it for. But to be honest, I think you can mind map just about anything, any kind of problem that you come up against in most areas of life could benefit from a mind map here and there. Erin says, I hadn't done mind mapping in a long time. I used it out for note taking in class and didn't much like it. Now, though, it helped with coming up with ideas a lot better than for retaining info. Agreeing with everyone. I love the design and drawing tips too. That's great. Yeah. I think the people's experience with mind mapping can be very different depending on, because I think I first learned it in, I want to say it was history in school, and I was maybe 13 or 14. And I remember being like, oh wow, we're allowed to like draw and stuff. That's crazy. Like that seems like such a waste of time, or like, it seems like such a luxury. And it was just like that one time or something that we got to do it. But the experience when you are just transcribing information, kind of note taking, retaining information, versus when you are actually following your own train of thought and generating stuff can be very, very different. So I think if you've only ever used it for note taking, it's easy to get one particular idea about it, which doesn't necessarily hold true if you're using it for brainstorming. Stephen asked, what are your thoughts on using a tablet along with a drawing application, e.g. Procreate? I'm interested and curious, and I think for mind maps and stuff, it probably is pretty effective as well. Obviously, I went through in quite some detail why I think analog is so useful and so powerful. But yeah, I know that with technology now, especially with tablets and digital drawing and that kind of things, you can do a lot digitally now. I think you can probably do a lot. I think one of the kind of downsides, I guess, is still that on a tablet, you can still get notifications and you can still be interrupted, and you still have the kind of low level, almost, it's not even like distraction in itself. It's more like a door to distraction of having like other apps and things that you can do on that. Which is something, it's a door that's kind of closed when you're working on paper to some extent. But yeah, I mean, I think it can be useful. And it depends, I suppose, of course, on what you prefer, on what kind of person you are. But I mean, I'm quite artistic. I do actually like doodling and drawing. I used to be much more artistic when I was younger and stuff. So I do have a kind of artist's interest in Procreate, in a good iPad or tablet or something like that. But I don't know. I've not actually ever brainstormed that way, so I can't really tell you my experience of it. Just that I'm interested, but I also see there being some potential downsides of it compared to analog. The other thing as well, I think, with analog is that it kind of teaches you to be better, or to deal better and to handle mistakes better. Because if you are mind mapping in pen and you make a mistake, you just have to deal with it. You score it out, or you turn it into something else, and you just move on. And I think that is really valuable, especially in an assignment or a task where I don't want you to censor yourself. I think the how easy it is to delete things and correct mistakes and stuff digitally can can maybe make you tempted to censor yourself a little bit more, perhaps. But as I said, I've not actually tried it, so I don't know. Yeah, Stephen's like, paper is better than tablet, is better than keyboard. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, honestly, that like risk of distraction is a really good way to put it, I think. Because I am really, what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm really diligent about having all my notifications off, or like they go to my notification center without, getting a bing or something. But sorry, that's Ross coming in. It's distracting me. But I do think there is something about just the fact that, like, so if I'm writing, for instance, like just knowing that I can open Safari and open a tab to like start searching something or researching something, I often find myself doing that instinctively without even realizing that I've done that, and maybe being like, oh man, I'm trying to focus on this thing. Whereas obviously with paper you can't do that. You can't just out of habit open up Tumblr or Twitter or Safari or whatever. Great. Yeah, this is really interesting to hear, guys. Thank you. Okay, so I think my last question for you guys, unless you have any other questions for me or anything you'd like to share, is, did anyone have any kind of aha moments or anything with this week's lesson and assignment? Was there anything in particular that stood out to you as being really useful, or that you hadn't thought of it in that way, or kind of maybe came into focus a little bit more when you did the assignment? I'd be really interested to hear if there's anything like that. Tatiana says, oh, I'm so glad you said that about making mistakes. I like doing the mind maps, but I've noticed that sometimes it slows me down because I'm subconsciously worried about aesthetics or making mistakes. I need to learn to just go with it. Yeah, it is a balance, of course, because I do like mine to be some level of aesthetic, which is why I have those tips and tricks that I showed you guys about different ways to draw arrows and stuff in pen to make it look like it's on purpose, even though you have to draw one thing first and then the other. You can't like plan it out like you would in pencil and then ink it perfectly. But I think working in pen is still, it's so useful. It's so, the fact that it forces you to commit to what you're writing, short or something like Tipp-Ex or whiteout, is so valuable. And sometimes I do just score things out. And sometimes, I do something and I get the urge to score out, and then I'm like, no, you know what? It doesn't really matter that much. It's fine. Which actually I think you guys probably saw in the lesson when I wrote brainstorm every problem you come up against. I like wrote one of the letters wrong, and I just kind of finished it and wrote over it anyway and just left it as it was, because I was like, you know what? Life isn't perfect. Okay. Chrissy said, I really like the analogy you use of losing your keys and knowing that they're somewhere in the house versus not knowing. Thank you. I'm glad that made sense. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about that. Like the determination that it gives you when you know that something is possible, and believing that it is possible and that you will get it if you keep going is often what gets you there. And Brittany says, drilling into my head that brainstorming is still writing was really important to hear again. I'm glad. It's something I will continue to say for the rest of my life, I expect. Elizabeth says, I guess I should make the switch from pencil to pen. I'm just very attached to being able to erase. There are times for pencils. Absolutely, there are times for pencils. But brainstorming is a time for pen, because brainstorming is where you make the mistakes. And it is important, I think, to get it into your head that it's you write first and you think about it later. And it is, there's another kind of analogy, I guess, that I use, which I don't know how it worked for you guys, but in exams, for instance, especially in maths exams, we would have the question paper, our answer paper, and then we'd have like a bit of scrap paper for us to do our working on. And I think that it's really important to see brainstorming as like the working. It does not have to be perfect. in fact, it can't be perfect, because you're never going to get it perfect first time. The point is to work it out messily and then, transcribe it into whatever format your answers will be in. For a story, that's going to be your draft. For a maths exam, it's going to be, the answer is 744 or whatever. So yeah, I'm not telling you to get rid of all your pencils forever, Elizabeth, because there is definitely a time for pencil, but brainstorming is a time for pen. In my heart, I know that to be true. Okay, wow, guys, I can't believe it's already been 50 minutes. That's wild. Okay, so I don't actually have anything else to really cover with you guys or to ask you. It's been really interesting hearing how you got on. Thank you. So I think if anyone has any last questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. And I think I will wrap it up in the next few minutes. Oh, did you chat with the previous set of students? What do you mean? Because 3 of them are here now. So Tatiana and Stephen were both previous students. Could you ask them if we could watch their chats? That is totally up to them. It's obviously very personal. So we did the 1.0 version of the Academy I did in live calls. So I literally delivered the lesson through a call and we spoke over and stuff. If any of the previous students would like to share their recordings, they absolutely can. Although I would like to make sure that obviously that we're not releasing lessons that are ahead of where we are with the current Academy. But it's also quite personal for them, so it's totally up to them. Russell says, oh, that sounds too personal. Absolutely, don't worry, Tatiana. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. But yes, if anyone does want to share, then they absolutely can. But obviously, like I said, I don't want people to be going out to lesson 4 and stuff when we're only at 1. But yeah, okay. Stephen says, I was surprised at how useful the doodling was. Yeah, honestly, I actually doodle a lot more than I used to. And it's in quite a rigid way. I have certain things that I know I can doodle that I find aesthetically pleasing, so I tend to just do that. But I really do, I know this is not news to anyone really, or a lot of people say this about doodling, but I really do find it quite therapeutic, and I find that it helps me think things over and that I get into kind of a state of flow and stuff around it. I think if you have a kind of small repertoire of things that you doodle, even if they're not, you're not someone that draws, it can just be shapes and stuff. I find that is helpful for kind of getting things unstuck in your mind, especially when doing something like mind mapping. As you guys probably saw in the lesson, I tend to, my thing is leaves right now, just doing little branches and leaves because it's super simple. I can do it without thinking about it. But I find that very useful actually if I'm thinking about the next thing that I want to write. If I've come up at a blank for some reason, keeping the pen moving by doing a doodle or something is quite useful. But I think, obviously it's not for everyone, but I think there's a real, I don't know, yeah, I feel quite strongly that I feel personally I had it drilled into me, or I'd managed to acquire the idea that stuff like that is it's just a waste of time and it's not productive. And how dare you do something silly and fun for yourself, doodling? How dare you take that time? And more I'm fuck you, take the time, life's too short, let yourself doodle. Yeah, Stephen says maybe some of the later ones, but I will say for Russell's benefit that even the change of format, Rachel hasn't dropped off any points that she covered the first time. Yeah, actually, in fact, I've actually incorporated, so students the first time around did not have a ton of questions, but I did answer some questions, but I'm actually culling those out of the videos and making sure to include them in your lessons. So you're not really missing out on much, if anything. Yes, but we didn't do like kind of group live streams like this the first time around. Chrissy says, oh, I love the idea of having a repertoire of doodles. Yeah, like mine is really small. So I've got like these Cheyenne Barton roses and then little branches with leaves. And then I've got those suit sprites from Studio Ghibli, which if you're not good at doodling are so easy. It's just a circle and you give it eyes and you color it in black and you do some squiggles and it's great. But yeah, I think things like having this little handful of things that you know how to doodle, if that makes sense, like you know the shape of them and you're happy with how they come out, that you can kind of just do over and over kind of meditatively is very handy. Yeah, Stephen says, maybe this is why mind maps are better than lists. Even drawing the bubbles gives your brain a bit of idle thinking time. I think that's absolutely true. I think your brain does just respond better to the kind of like non-linear kind of, because your brain isn't linear, you know, kind of format of it. Not to say that like there isn't a place for list brainstorming as well, because you guys will see that in my plot with me videos, I do almost entirely list brainstorming. You'll see it's just me writing out lines and stuff. But I think maybe even when you're getting started, mind mapping is probably more effective to kind of train your brain how to brainstorm in the first place. And then after you're kind of practiced at it, it doesn't matter quite so much which method you use. But mind mapping, I think, is definitely more fun. And I think that in itself is a huge point in its favor, really. Brittany says, I grew up with that mindset too, that doodling was too silly, and I'm glad to get back to it now. Thank you. I'm so glad. I actually got in trouble in school for doodling, and maybe that's part of it, is kind of like burned that into my brain a little bit. But I would doodle to concentrate because I was artistic as well. I was drawing constantly, and it didn't mean that I wasn't listening. It actually helped me kind of take in what was going on, but teachers were constantly telling me to stop. Yes, okay, folks, this has been great, and I'm really looking forward to getting lesson 2 out and hearing what you think of it, because as our previous students will attest, lesson 2 is really fun. It's a really fun one. So yeah, I'm excited to see how that goes. It's a little early, but I like this batch of classmates. Good, I'm glad. I'm always like pleasantly surprised by the fact that I seem to just attract really nice, good people, and everyone seems really nice, so it's great. Okay, thanks very much, folks, for joining me. If you haven't finished the assignment yet, good luck with that. I hope that everything goes all right and is quite interesting. And if you're finished, then I will see you for lesson 2. Great. Okay. Bye. Thank you. We are really nice. It's not an illusion.